Still can't hit the paper, old-timer. Maybe you need glasses for your glasses. The condescending drawl echoed through the sterile, cavernous space of the shooting range, followed by a ripple of snickering. Roy Brooks, 82 years old, said nothing. He simply lowered the barrel of his old wood-stocked rifle, his movements as slow and deliberate as a glacier's crawl. His breath plumed faintly in the cool, climate-controlled air. The young range officer, whose name tag read Miller, watched him with a practiced expression of weary patience, one eyebrow arched. He was already composing the speech in his head about range safety and proficiency requirements. The sprawling indoor range was a cathedral of modern firepower. Gleaming polymer rifles with more attachments than a Swiss Army knife lined the shooting stalls on either side of Roy. The air, thick with the sharp metallic tang of gunpowder, vibrated with the percussive crack and pop of high-velocity rounds. Digital screens displayed shot groupings with laser precision, and in the middle of it all was Roy, a relic from a bygone era. His rifle was a Springfield M21, its walnut stock worn smooth and dark with age and the oil of his hands. He wore simple denim jeans and a flannel shirt, a stark contrast to the tactical gear and branded apparel of the younger shooters. The group to his left was the source of the mockery. 4 men in their late 20s, led by the one with the loud voice, a young man named Kyle whose arrogance was as polished as the chrome finish on his custom AR-15. They treated the range like their personal clubhouse, their laughter and loud boasts cutting through the focused silence expected in such a place. Every time Roy settled in, took a slow, methodical breath and squeezed the trigger, a solid thwack would echo from his stall, but the paper target 50 yards downrange remained pristine. Not a single hole marred its surface. After Roy's 5th shot produced the same result, Kyle grew bolder. "Hey, Miller," he shouted, not even bothering to lower his voice. "You guys charging by the hour or by the hole? Because this guy's getting a free ride." Miller's jaw tightened. He disliked Kyle's swagger, but the kid was a premium member and spent a fortune here. The old man, on the other hand, was a liability waiting to happen. He walked over to Roy's stall, his boots squeaking on the polished concrete. "Sir," he began, his voice dripping with forced politeness, "I'm going to have to ask what's going on here. You've fired several rounds and haven't once hit the target." Roy turned his head slowly, his eyes a pale, washed-out blue meeting Miller's. They were calm, clear, and held a depth that made the young officer vaguely uncomfortable. "I'm hitting it," Roy said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. Miller glanced down the lane at the perfectly untouched paper silhouette. He sighed, the sound of a man burdened by the incompetence of others. "Sir, with all due respect, you're not. The target is clean. Perhaps the 50-yard range is a bit ambitious. We have a 25-yard pistol range if you'd like to try that." The condescension was thick as molasses. He was talking to Roy as if he were a child who needed to be gently redirected. Kyle and his friends were now openly staring, smirks plastered on their faces, enjoying the show. "I'm fine right here," Roy said, turning back to his rifle. This was the last straw for Miller. His job was to ensure safety, and an old man who couldn't even put a round on paper from 50 yards was the definition of a safety risk. Who knew where those bullets were going? Ricocheting off the floor, the ceiling. "Sir, I'm the range safety officer," Miller said, his voice hardening, losing its thin veneer of courtesy. "And I'm telling you that you are not fine. You're being a hazard. I need to see your lane cleared and your weapon secured. Now." Roy didn't move. He continued to gaze downrange, his gnarled hands resting on the rifle. "The weapon is safe. The lane is clear. Your proficiency says otherwise," Miller snapped. He gestured for Roy to step back from the bench. "I need to see your range permit and your identification, and I'm going to have to inspect that rifle." Roy's placid demeanor didn't change. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out a worn leather wallet, and produced his driver's license and the shooting range membership card. He laid them on the bench. Then, with a reluctance that was almost palpable, he picked up his rifle and offered it to Miller, stock first. Miller took the weapon, surprised by its weight. It felt solid, dense, a piece of history. It lacked the ergonomic, lightweight feel of the modern rifles he was used to. It felt real. As he turned it over in his hands, his fingers brushed against a small, tarnished brass plate, no bigger than a postage stamp, that was skillfully inlaid into the side of the wooden stock. The moment his skin touched the metal, the sterile quiet of the range fell away, replaced by the deafening roar of helicopter blades and the hiss of torrential rain. For a split second he was somewhere else. A jungle impossibly green and soaking wet. The air was heavy, smelling of mud and decay. He saw the same rifle, but it was in the hands of a much younger man, his face smeared with camouflage paint, his knuckles white as he gripped the stock. A voice, tinny and frantic, crackled from a radio. "They're in the wire. They're in the wire. Ghost, we have a high-value target, but he's using a civilian as a shield. It's an impossible shot, I repeat. An impossible shot. The image seared into his mind. A terrified woman, a dark green enemy uniform behind her, and the thin whip-like antenna of a radio just visible over her shoulder. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving Miller blinking in the fluorescent lights of the range, the rifle feeling cold in his hands. He looked down at the brass plate. He could now make out the faint hand-etched markings, a set of coordinates and a date from over 50 years ago. He shook his head, clearing the strange sensation. It was just an old gun, a weird old gun. He gave it a cursory, dismissive inspection and placed it back on the bench, pushing it away from Roy's reach. "Everything seems to be in order," he said, trying to regain his composure. "But your shooting is not. I can't in good conscience let you continue." A small crowd had begun to gather behind the stalls. Other shooters, drawn by the confrontation, watched with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. The scene was becoming a spectacle. The old man, the young, officious range officer, and the jeering peanut gallery. Among the onlookers was a man named David, a former Marine in his early 30s. He'd been in the stall next to Kyle's group, trying to ignore their obnoxious commentary. But this whole situation with the old man felt wrong, deeply wrong. David hadn't served in the jungles of Vietnam, but in the deserts of Afghanistan. Still, he recognized the bearing. He saw it in the way Roy Brooks stood, perfectly balanced and utterly still. He saw it in the economy of his movements, the way his eyes constantly scanned without seeming to move at all. This was not some doddering old fool who had wandered into a gun range by mistake. This was a man who was more at home with a rifle in his hands than any of the preening wannabes laughing at him. David had also noticed something else. Something Miller and the others, in their rush to judge, had completely missed. Every time the old man fired, the wire holding the paper target holder trembled. It was an almost imperceptible vibration, a tiny shiver that lasted for less than a second. The paper was untouched, but the mechanism holding it was being struck, precisely, repeatedly. David's eyes widened. He's not missing. He's hitting the wire, or the clamp holding the wire. He's doing it on purpose. Miller's voice rose, filled with the self-righteous authority of a man who knows he has the crowd on his side. "Sir, I've given you every chance. You refuse to listen to reason. Your membership here is terminated, effective immediately. I'm calling security to have you escorted from the premises." He reached for the phone on the wall behind him. Kyle and his friends started clapping and whistling, as if their home team had just scored. That was it. David couldn't stand by any longer. He stepped back from the crowd, pulling out his own cell phone. He didn't call the police. He scrolled through his contacts to a number he hadn't used in years, a number that connected to his old unit's administrative office at Fort Carson. A gruff, familiar voice answered on the second ring. "Master Sergeant Evans." "Sarge, it's David Teller," he said, keeping his voice low. "Teller, what the hell do you want? Don't you know I'm retired?" The voice was joking, but only just. "Not officially for another 3 months, Sarge. Listen, I have a weird situation here. I'm at the civilian range, the top shot off Highway 83. There's an old-timer here, and the staff is about to throw him out, maybe even call the cops on him. And this is my problem, why?" Evans grumbled. "Let the civilian world handle its own messes." I know, David said urgently. "But there's something about this guy, the way he carries himself. His name is Roy Brooks. He's shooting an old Springfield rifle, looks like an M21. It's got a little brass plate on the stock. Can you just, I don't know, run the name for me? Please, something's not right here." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. David could hear the clicking of a keyboard. "Brooks, you said. Roy Brooks. Yeah, that's him. All right, kid, hold on. Let me see what I can find." The line went quiet. David watched as Miller spoke into the range's phone, his face a mask of smug satisfaction. The humiliation of Roy Brooks was almost complete. Inside a quiet, unassuming office at Fort Carson, Master Sergeant Evans stared at his computer screen. The casual boredom on his face had evaporated, replaced by wide-eyed, slack-jawed shock. He shot to his feet so fast his rolling chair flew backward and slammed into the filing cabinet behind him with a loud crash. "Colonel," he yelled, his voice cracking. "Colonel Reisman, you need to get in here, right now." Colonel Reisman, a man with silvering hair and an air of perpetual impatience, walked in from the adjoining office, a scowl on his face. "What is it, Evans? I'm in the middle of a logistics brief." Evans didn't answer. He just pointed a trembling finger at the monitor. The colonel leaned in, his eyes scanning the screen. It was a heavily redacted military file. Most of the text was thick black lines, but a few words and phrases were starkly visible. Chief Warrant Officer, MAC VSOG, Medal of Honor, Operation Ghost, Legendary. The colonel's face went white. He straightened up as if he'd been struck by lightning. He looked at Evans, his eyes blazing with an intensity the master sergeant had not seen since they were in Fallujah. "Where is he?" the colonel demanded. "A civilian shooting range. Top shot. Off 83. One of my old lance corporals is there. He's the one who called." "Get me General Matheson on the secure line," Reisman commanded, his voice a low, urgent thunder. "Now, and scramble the honor guard. I want a 4-man detail and a command vehicle. Full dress blues. I don't care who you have to pull off what duty. I want them at that range in 10 minutes. Go." Back at the range, Miller had hung up the phone. He turned to Roy with a look of finality. "Security is on their way, sir. They'll hold you until the police arrive." He then reached out and snatched the Springfield from the bench. "And I'm confiscating this as evidence of reckless endangerment. You're a danger to yourself and everyone here. Frankly, I think you need a psychiatric evaluation. Someone with your condition shouldn't be anywhere near a firearm." Kyle and his friends howled with laughter. "Yeah, get him a nice padded room," one of them shouted. For the first time, a flicker of something other than calm crossed Roy's face. A deep, profound sadness. He finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight that cut through the noise. "Son, I strongly suggest you give me back my rifle." The simple, direct command, devoid of any obvious threat, only served to inflate Miller's ego further. He clutched the rifle to his chest like a prize. "Or what, old man?" he sneered. "You gonna challenge me to a game of checkers?" The words had barely left his mouth when the double doors at the entrance of the range flew open with a bang. Every head turned. It wasn't the range's overweight, shuffling security guard. Standing in the doorway was a full colonel, his uniform so crisp it looked like it could cut glass. Behind him, 4 soldiers in immaculate dress blues stood at perfect attention. They moved into the room with a synchronized, silent precision that was both beautiful and terrifying. The air in the range instantly changed. The laughter died in Kyle's throat. The jeering smirks vanished. The entire room fell into a dead, shocked silence, broken only by the hum of the ventilation system. Colonel Reisman's eyes, cold and hard as granite, swept across the room. He ignored Miller, ignored Kyle, ignored the stunned crowd. His gaze scanned the stalls until it found the old man in the flannel shirt. His entire demeanor softened. He strode forward, his polished boots clicking rhythmically on the floor, a sound that seemed to count down Miller's entire career. He walked past the young range officer as if he were a piece of furniture and came to a halt 2 feet in front of Roy Brooks. Then, in a motion so sharp and perfect it seemed to defy human anatomy, Colonel Reisman raised his hand to his brow and delivered the most profound, respectful salute Miller had ever witnessed in his life. "Mr. Brooks," the colonel's voice boomed, resonating with an authority that made the very walls seem to tremble. "Colonel Reisman, forgive the intrusion, sir. We were informed you were in the area." Roy, looking slightly weary of the whole affair, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. The salute was returned with a gesture, not a formal reply. Reisman held the salute for a moment longer before dropping his hand. He then turned, and the full, unbridled force of his fury fell upon the pale, trembling Miller. "Officer," the colonel said, his voice dangerously low, "you are currently holding a piece of United States military history, a weapon that belongs to a national hero. You will return it to him, immediately." Numbly, his hands shaking, Miller handed the rifle back to Roy, who took it and cradled it with a familiar ease. Reisman then turned to address the silent, gaping crowd. "For those of you who seem to be under a grave misapprehension," he began, his voice ringing with indignation, "you are in the presence of Chief Warrant Officer Roy Brooks, retired. The man you have spent the last hour mocking holds the Congressional Medal of Honor for actions during the Vietnam War. Actions so critical and so highly classified that most of his official citation is still blacked out to this very day." A collective gasp went through the room. Kyle looked as if he was about to be sick. "Mr. Brooks served with the Military Assistance Command, Vietnam Studies and Observations Group," the colonel continued, his voice rising. "He was a phantom, a legend in a unit comprised entirely of legends. His call sign was the Ghost, and in 3 tours of duty, executing missions most people would call impossible, he never missed a shot. Not a single one." He gestured a hand down the lane toward Roy's pristine target. "You all laughed because you thought he was missing. You judged him without knowledge, without respect. He wasn't missing. He was demonstrating a level of skill that you could not possibly comprehend." The colonel walked with purpose down the now silent firing line. He didn't stop at the paper target. He walked past it, to the thick concrete backstop wall at the very end of the lane. A thick black rubber curtain hung in front of it to absorb ricochets. Reisman pulled the heavy curtain aside. There, embedded in the concrete, directly behind where the center of the target would be, was a single small ragged hole. "Cease fire on all lanes." Miller squeaked, his voice cracking. He fumbled with the master control panel, and the red lights above each stall flicked on. In the ensuing, absolute silence, Colonel Reisman's voice was clear as a bell. "Check the bullet trap." Humiliation radiated from Miller in waves. He practically ran to the small metal access door behind the backstop wall. His hands trembled so badly it took him 3 tries to get the key in the lock. He swung the heavy door open. Inside was a large steel bin, the bullet trap, filled with thousands of pounds of sand and countless flattened lead slugs from years of use. But right on top, in the very center, was something that defied belief. A small, neat pile of 10 bullets. Each one was perfectly mushroomed, and they were stacked one on top of the other, fused together by the heat and force of their impact into a single grotesque little sculpture of impossible marksmanship. The crowd stared, speechless. They hadn't been watching a clumsy old man miss a target. They had been witnessing a master so far beyond their understanding that they couldn't even recognize his genius. They had laughed at Michelangelo for chipping away at a block of marble. Colonel Reisman walked back to the firing line, his cold gaze falling on Miller and then on Kyle, who was trying to shrink into the wall. "There are words," the colonel said, his voice seething with contempt. "Words like duty, honor, and respect. I suggest you look them up. You judged a man by his age, you mocked him for his quiet dignity, and you have disgraced yourselves in this establishment." He turned back to Roy. "Sir, on behalf of the United States Army, I apologize for the disrespect you have been shown here. We can arrange for a private, secure range for you at Fort Carson, anytime you wish." Roy shook his head, a faint, tired smile touching his lips. He looked at Miller, who was now staring at the floor, his face the color of ash. "There's no need for that, Colonel." The boy was just overzealous, trying to do his job as he saw it. "He's young." He took a step toward Miller, who flinched. Roy's voice was gentle. "A rifle is only a tool. It's only as good as the person holding it. But a man is only as good as the respect he shows to others. Don't ever forget that, son." As Roy spoke those words, a final fleeting image surfaced. The jungle, the rain, the impossible shot. A young Roy doesn't aim at the enemy soldier. He doesn't aim at the hostage. He aims at something no one else would even see, the thin metal buckle on the strap of the hostage's backpack. He breathes out, squeezes the trigger. The buckle shatters. The heavy pack falls away, and the hostage stumbles forward, out of the line of fire. A second shot, a heartbeat later, finds its mark. Later, in the quiet aftermath, his commanding officer grips his shoulder, pressing a small hand-stamped brass plate into his palm. "The coordinates of the village you saved today, Ghost. Never forget the lives you touch are more important than the ones you take." Back in the present, Roy's thumb gently stroked that same brass plate on the stock of his rifle. The fallout was swift. The owner of the range arrived, his face a mask of horror as the story was relayed to him by a still-shaking David. He fired Miller on the spot, but Roy quietly intervened. "The boy learned a lesson today he'll never forget," he said. "Don't ruin his life over it. Give him a second chance to learn humility." Miller was demoted, not fired. His days as a range safety officer were over, and he was reassigned to the front desk and janitorial duties. The range, in a public relations move and a genuine attempt at atonement, instituted a new mandatory Veterans Awareness training program for all its staff, a program developed with Colonel Reisman's direct input. Kyle and his friends received lifetime bans, their photos posted discreetly behind the counter as a quiet warning. Weeks later, Roy Brooks walked into the building again. He wasn't carrying his rifle case. He was just heading for the small cafe that shared the building. Miller was behind the counter, wiping it down with a rag. He saw the old man enter and he froze. Their eyes met across the room. There was no anger in Roy's gaze, no hint of accusation. There was only a quiet, peaceful acknowledgement. Miller straightened up, his posture different, less arrogant, more reserved. He gave a short, respectful nod. "Mr. Brooks." Roy offered a small, forgiving smile and nodded back. "Son." He then turned and walked into the cafe, leaving the young man alone with the quiet echo of his lesson, a lesson learned not through punishment, but through a humbling, unforgettable display of unassuming valor. Roy Brooks's story is a powerful reminder that heroes walk among us, often unseen. Their quiet dignity and profound skill are a testament to their valor. If you were moved by his story, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more.